August 1966. A motorcycle crash shatters his world. 2 years later, a fire takes his children. And yet, his voice still soared above the darkness. This is the story of the man who sang heartbreak better than anyone who ever lived, Roy Orbison. Chapter 1. The Voice from Another World. Roy Kelton Orbison was born on April 23, 1936, in the dusty little town of Vernon, Texas. He was a quiet child, pale, soft-spoken, and so shy that even in family gatherings he preferred the corner. But there was something about him that stood out even then. Roy had severe myopia and amblyopia, which meant his vision was poor in one eye and blurry in the other. As a boy, he wore thick glasses, which made him a target for teasing. He often stayed indoors to avoid the rough games of the other kids, and instead, he found a friend in music. When he was 6 years old, his father came home with a small guitar. The moment Roy strummed his first chord, something clicked. The strings seemed to vibrate right through him. Within a year, his high, pure voice was floating over the airwaves of a local radio station. Neighbors would recall how, at backyard gatherings, the shy boy would suddenly open his mouth to sing, and everyone would stop talking. It was a voice that didn't match his small frame, a voice already carrying the ache of a grown man's heart. Outside of music, Roy had another fascination. Machines, cars, motorcycles, anything with an engine. He'd often sketch cars in his notebooks at school. That love of speed would stay with him for life, for better and for worse. But music was the thing that gave him a sense of identity. Years later, Roy would say, "I was always a little lonely. Maybe that's why my songs sound that way." Chapter 2. Chasing the Dream. By high school, music wasn't just a hobby. It was Roy's future. He formed a band with friends called the Wink Westerners, named after his tiny hometown. They played country standards at local dances, school assemblies, and even on a small radio program. Roy wasn't a flashy performer. While others strutted across the stage, Roy stood almost motionless, letting his voice do the moving. At first, people mistook it for stage fright. Later, they realized it was part of his magic. The stillness made you listen harder. The Wink Westerners gradually shifted toward rockabilly, changing their name to the Teen Kings. In 1956, they recorded Ooby Dooby, a bouncy, good-time number that unexpectedly started getting airplay. That single reached Sun Records in Memphis, the label that had launched Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Stepping into Sun Studios was like walking into the heart of rock and roll. Elvis was already a phenomenon. Jerry Lee pounded the piano like a madman. Johnny Cash's baritone could fill the room without a mic. Roy was different, polite, quiet, still wearing those thick glasses. But when he sang, people stopped talking. He's said to have received a compliment from Elvis himself. "Man, you've got a voice that's going to stick in people's heads." But Sun was all about raw, driving energy, and Roy's delicate, emotional style didn't quite fit. His early singles failed to chart, and he began to wonder if rock and roll had a place for him. He started writing songs for other artists, including the Everly Brothers, who recorded his Claudette as the B-side to their hit All I Have to Do Is Dream. Roy was learning the craft of songwriting, sharpening the emotional storytelling that would one day define him. Still, the dream of performing never left. He just needed the right label and the right sound. Chapter 3. The Orbison Sound. That moment came when Roy signed with Monument Records in 1959, working with producer Fred Foster. Instead of forcing him into the rockabilly mold, Foster gave him freedom. "Sing the way you feel it, and we'll build the song around you." This changed everything. Roy's songs didn't follow the rules. While most hits stuck to a verse-chorus pattern, his were like miniature dramas, starting softly, building tension, and exploding in a high emotional climax. His three-octave range let him soar from a deep, velvety baritone to a falsetto so high it seemed impossible. Only the Lonely in 1960 was his breakthrough, followed by Running Scared, a song with no chorus that ends in one of the most powerful held notes in pop music history. Crying It's Over and In Dreams cemented his reputation. And then came Oh Pretty Woman in 1964. The song's famous guitar riff, played by Billy Sanford, was paired with a distinctive foot stomp from the musicians to keep time. That stomp became part of the song's identity, and when released, it sold over 7 million copies worldwide. On stage, Roy was a mystery. Dressed head to toe in black, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, he barely moved, yet he had audiences hanging on every note. The glasses weren't just style. His poor eyesight made bright lights painful. In 1963, during a UK tour with the Beatles, he misplaced his regular glasses and had to wear the dark ones everywhere, and fans loved the look. Elvis called him the best singer in the world. Bruce Springsteen later said Roy's music taught him that rock could be epic and heartbreaking at the same time. Chapter 4. The Tragedies That Changed Everything. By the early 1960s, Roy Orbison was at the height of his fame. His music dominated the charts, he toured internationally, and in places like England, he was a bigger draw than even some of the British invasion bands. In fact, during a 1963 UK tour, the Beatles, still on the edge of superstardom, opened for him. John Lennon later admitted they were nervous about following him because audiences adored Roy. On one night in Glasgow, he played 14 encores before finally leaving the stage, and the crowd still wanted more. But behind the dark glasses and the smooth, controlled stage presence, Roy's personal life was turbulent. His marriage to Claudette Frady was filled with deep affection, but also strains of jealousy, long separations, and infidelity on both sides. They divorced in 1964, but their bond was too strong to break completely. By 1965, they had remarried, determined to start fresh. Roy even wrote Claudette in her honor, a playful, romantic tune that hinted at happier times. Then came June 6, 1966, a day that would scar him forever. Roy and Claudette decided to take their motorcycles out for a ride near their home in Gallatin, Tennessee. The weather was perfect, the sun bright. Roy was in the lead, Claudette just behind him. They passed through a quiet intersection. When out of the corner of his eye, Roy saw movement, a truck pulling into the road. Before he could react, Claudette's motorcycle collided with it. The sound of the crash, the screech of metal. Roy would later say, "It all happened in seconds, but felt like a slow, endless nightmare." She died instantly. Friends said the days that followed were like watching a man walk through life in a daze. His normally calm voice turned even quieter. He avoided interviews, spending hours alone with his guitar. For months, he carried her memory into every song he sang, and audiences could hear the grief in his voice. But fate was not done with him. Just over 2 years later, in September 1968, Roy was on tour in England when he received a phone call that would change his life again. His home in Hendersonville, Tennessee, had caught fire in the middle of the day. Inside were his 3 young sons, Roy Jr., Anthony, and Wesley. Neighbors saw smoke pouring from the roof and tried desperately to get inside. They managed to save Wesley, but Roy Jr. and Anthony were trapped. The fire moved too fast. When Roy was told the news overseas, those present said the blood drained from his face. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat perfectly still for what seemed like hours. On the flight home, he kept a photograph of his boys in his lap, staring at it in silence. When he arrived in Tennessee, close friends like Johnny Cash and neighbors stepped in to help, arranging the funeral, helping rebuild what they could, even making sure Wesley was cared for while Roy tried to process the unimaginable. The loss changed him. He had already been known for singing sad songs, but now the sadness was no longer an act or an interpretation. It was real, etched into every note he sang. From that point forward, every time Roy opened his mouth to sing, audiences weren't just hearing heartbreak. They were hearing a man trying to survive it. And as the music world moved on to new sounds, the Beatles, psychedelic rock, hard rock, Roy's place in the charts began to fade, but those who saw him perform in the years after the tragedies often said his voice was more haunting than ever, because it carried the weight of everything he had lost. Chapter 5. The Long Road Back. The 1970s were quiet years for Roy Orbison, at least in the eyes of the public. The rock world had moved on to harder, louder sounds, and the charts no longer played his kind of heartbreak ballads. But to his peers, Roy was never forgotten. Bruce Springsteen called him the voice of loneliness. Elvis Presley told friends that Orbison was the best ballad singer alive. Even in obscurity, his name carried weight. Roy kept touring, often as an opening act for younger bands, and his stillness on stage became even more striking in an era of wild performances. He didn't jump, shout, or dance. He just stood there in black, let the spotlight fall on his face, and sang like a man telling the last story he'd ever tell. Then, in 1986, a strange twist of fate put him back in the spotlight. Film director David Lynch used In Dreams in his movie Blue Velvet. The haunting scene, Dean Stockwell lip-syncing Roy's voice in eerie slow motion, shocked audiences and reintroduced Orbison to a whole new generation. From there, things snowballed. George Harrison invited him to join a new supergroup, the Traveling Wilburys, alongside Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. Despite his quiet nature, the younger Wilburys treated him like royalty. Tom Petty later said, "We were all just in awe of him. You'd be sitting there and Roy would open his mouth to sing, and you'd forget to play your part." Roy was also finally working on a new solo album, his first in years, and for the first time in decades, the world seemed ready to hear from him again. Chapter 6. The Final Song. In 1988, Roy Orbison was on fire again. The Wilburys' debut album was a hit. Critics were calling him the comeback king, and his new solo album, Mystery Girl, was nearly finished. The standout track, You Got It, was pure Orbison. Soaring vocals, aching romance, and that signature build to an emotional peak. It would become one of his most beloved songs, but he never got to see it top the charts. On the night of December 4th, 1988, Roy played what would be his final concert, a sold-out show in Highland Heights, Ohio. Friends noticed how happy he seemed backstage. The comeback was real, the crowds were bigger, and the applause was louder than it had been in years. 2 nights later, December 6th, he spent the day in Hendersonville, Tennessee. He had lunch with his mother, then returned home to spend time with his sons and his second wife, Barbara. He seemed relaxed, even playful, proud of how things were turning around. That evening, after dinner, Roy complained of feeling a little unwell. His mother urged him to rest. He went upstairs, sat in a chair, and began to drift off. Moments later, Barbara found him unconscious. Roy Orbison died of a massive heart attack at 52 years old. It happened so suddenly that many friends didn't believe the news at first. Tom Petty said he was absolutely shattered, while George Harrison recalled that the Wilburys had just been planning their next record. 2 months later, You Got It hit the top 10 worldwide, and Mystery Girl became one of his best-selling albums. A posthumous victory for a man who had spent his life singing about love, loss, and longing. The final chapter. The voice lives on. Roy Orbison's funeral was held on a cold December day in 1988. The church was filled with family, friends, and fellow musicians, some of the greatest names in rock history. Yet the mood was one of quiet reverence. Everyone knew they weren't just saying goodbye to a man, but to a voice that would never be heard live again. In the weeks that followed, something extraordinary happened. You Got It, the song he had recorded just before his death, began climbing the charts in country after country. It became a worldwide hit, proof that even in death, Roy Orbison's music could still break through. His album Mystery Girl sold millions, and for many younger fans, it was the first time they were truly discovering him. Over the years, his influence has only grown. Bruce Springsteen has called him a voice from another world. Bono once said, Roy's voice could bring tears to the eyes of a hardened criminal. His songs have been covered by everyone from K.D. Lang to Van Halen, and even decades later, filmmakers and TV shows still use In Dreams or Crying to send shivers down an audience's spine. And maybe that's the true magic of Roy Orbison, that haunting combination of vulnerability and strength, of mystery and raw emotion. His sunglasses may have hidden his eyes, but his songs revealed everything about his heart. Roy once said, I may be a quiet man, but I sing loud, and through his music, that voice still echoes, clear, strong, and unforgettable. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Go listen to Crying, In Dreams, or You Got It, and hear for yourself why no one before or since has ever sounded like Roy Orbison. And if you believe more people should know his story, share this video, leave a comment about your favorite Roy song, and let's keep his legacy alive for the next generation. Because legends don't truly die. Not as long as we keep listening.